The desperate call. The distress signal arrived at Earth's deep space monitoring station like a whisper carried on cosmic winds. It was weak, fragmented, and encoded in a mathematical language that took the best cryptographers 12 hours to decipher. When they finally understood what they were hearing, the room fell silent. Commander Sarah Chen stood in the United Earth Defense Force headquarters, listening to the translation for the 5th time. The voice that emerged from the speakers belonged to something that had never evolved to know war, never developed the concept of violence, never imagined that intelligence could be paired with cruelty. The Krillians spoke in harmonics, their message a symphony of desperation that made even battle-hardened soldiers shift uncomfortably in their seats. To any civilization capable of receiving this transmission, the musical voice began, each note trembling with an emotion that transcended species barriers. We are the Krillians of the 7th spiral. Our kind has existed for 12,000 of your standard years. We have built cities of living crystal. We have composed mathematical equations that predict the birth of stars. We have never raised a weapon, because we never imagined we would need one. Now something has come for us from the empty spaces between galaxies. They call themselves the Void Hunters. They do not negotiate. They do not show mercy. They simply consume. Sarah turned to her second-in-command, Lieutenant Marcus Torres, a man who had fought in the Mars Uprising and still carried shrapnel in his left shoulder from a conflict most people preferred to forget. His dark eyes reflected the same thought she was having. Throughout human history, they had been the monsters in their own stories. They had invented weapons before they invented writing. They had nearly destroyed their own planet 3 times before finally achieving unity. Now, for the first time, they might be someone else's salvation. The Galactic Commerce Alliance had already issued their response to the Krillian distress call. It was a masterpiece of bureaucratic cowardice wrapped in diplomatic language. The Void Hunters were too powerful, they claimed. The risk to establish trade routes was too great. The Krillians, peaceful as they were, contributed little to the galactic economy. Their loss, while regrettable, was not worth starting an interstellar war. Sarah read the Alliance's response with disgust. The Zentari, with their forearms and superior technology, had ships that could cross the galaxy in days, but they wouldn't lift a finger. The Morrigan Collective, beings of pure energy who had transcended physical form, possessed weapons that could destroy entire solar systems, yet they remained silent. Every advanced civilization in the known galaxy had heard the Krillians' plea and chosen to do nothing. Earth's World Council convened an emergency session. The debate raged for 18 hours straight. Economists calculated the cost and resources. Military advisors warned about the unknown capabilities of the Void Hunters. Diplomats fretted about Earth's standing in the Galactic Commerce Alliance, such as it was. Humanity was still considered a minor species, barely 200 years into space travel, still using combustion reactions and nuclear fusion, while others had moved on to antimatter and zero-point energy. But there was something else in that room, something that the economists and diplomats couldn't quite quantify. It was the same thing that had made humans climb down from trees and challenge predators 10 times their size. It was the thing that made them sail wooden ships across unknown oceans and strap themselves to rockets aimed at the moon. It was the beautiful, dangerous, impossibly human trait of looking at overwhelming odds and saying, "Someone has to try." The vote was closer than Sarah had hoped, but decisive enough to matter. Earth would answer the call. Within 72 hours, humanity assembled the largest fleet in its short spacefaring history. 120 vessels, from massive battlecruisers to nimble corvettes, gathered at the Jupiter staging point. They weren't the sleek, elegant ships of the Zentari or the crystalline constructs of the Morrigan. Human ships were brutal things, all angles and armor, bristling with weapons that other species considered barbaric. Kinetic railguns that could accelerate tungsten rods to significant fractions of light speed. Nuclear missiles with yields that made other civilizations question humanity's sanity. Fighter craft that required pilots to endure G-forces that would liquefy most other species. Sarah stood on the bridge of the flagship, UES Perseverance, watching her fleet prepare for a journey into the unknown. Her crew was a mixture of veterans and volunteers, men and women who had answered the call not for glory or profit, but because somewhere in the dark, innocent beings were dying, and somebody had to give a damn. Dr. James Okonkwo, the fleet's chief science officer, approached with his latest analysis of the Void Hunters. He was a tall man whose gentle demeanor belied his past as a weapons designer. "Commander, I've been studying the scattered reports from refugee ships. The Void Hunters don't just kill. They seem to feed on the fear and suffering of their victims. Their ships are biological, grown rather than built. They adapt to enemy tactics within hours." Sarah nodded grimly. "Then we'll have to be unpredictable. How long until we reach Krillian space?" 6 weeks at maximum burn. Our fusion drives can't match the Alliance's faster-than-light systems, but we can maintain higher acceleration for longer periods. The crew will need to be in rotating shifts to handle the G-forces. 6 weeks. Sarah wondered how many Krillians would die in that time. She wondered if there would be anyone left to save when they arrived. But wondering wouldn't change anything. Action would. The fleet departed with no fanfare from the Galactic Commerce Alliance. A few species sent diplomatic notes, expressing concern about humanity's reckless intervention. The Zentari ambassador called it typical Deathworld behavior, a term that had become synonymous with humanity's tendency to rush toward danger rather than away from it. Earth's colony on Proxima sent a message that simply read, "Give them hell." During the journey, Sarah instituted continuous combat drills. The crew practiced scenarios against an enemy they had never seen, using tactics that would have been considered war crimes by more civilized species. They prepared chemical weapons, biological agents, and psychological warfare techniques. They studied every scrap of information about the Void Hunters, looking for weaknesses that others might have missed. 3 weeks into the journey, they received another transmission from Krillos. The situation had deteriorated. The Void Hunters had taken 3 of their 7 inhabited worlds. Billions were dead. The survivors had retreated to underground shelters on their homeworld, Krillos Prime, but the Hunters were slowly breaking through their defenses. The Krillian who sent the message, someone called Resonance of Stars, spoke with the fatalistic acceptance of someone who had already accepted death. "If anyone receives this, please remember that we existed. We created beauty. We solved the unified field theorem. We loved our children. Remember us." Sarah played that message to the entire fleet. She watched as hardened soldiers clenched their fists, as engineers worked even longer shifts to squeeze every bit of speed from their engines, as medical staff prepared for casualties that might never come, because failure meant there would be no one left to save. When they finally dropped out of their acceleration burn at the edge of Krillian space, the scene that greeted them was worse than their darkest projections. The outer planets were dead, their surfaces scoured clean of life. Massive bioships, each the size of a small moon, drifted between worlds like cosmic predators. They were wrong in a way that made human instincts scream. They pulsed with a bioluminescent light that seemed to drain hope from anyone who looked at it too long. Their surfaces were covered in what looked like eyes and mouths, constantly shifting and reforming, and there, barely visible against the backdrop of space, was Krillos Prime. The planet that had once been described as a jewel of civilization was now shrouded in dark clouds. Tiny lights on the surface marked the last pockets of resistance, growing fewer by the hour. Sarah opened a channel to the fleet. "All ships, this is Commander Chen. You've all seen what we're facing. You know the odds. The Galactic Commerce Alliance thinks we're insane for being here. They're probably right. But look at that planet. Look at those lights. Each one represents thousands of beings who are counting on someone, anyone, to care enough to help. Today we're that someone. Today, humanity stops being the new kids in the galaxy and starts being the species others tell stories about. All ships battle stations. Let's remind the universe why they call us Deathworlders. When predators meet their match. The first Void Hunter ship to notice the human fleet turned toward them, with a motion that was disturbingly organic, like a massive creature in an ocean of stars. It was larger than any vessel humanity had ever constructed, a writhing mass of biological matter that defied conventional understanding of spacecraft. Tentacles the size of skyscrapers writhed from its surface, and along its hull countless eyes opened, each one the size of a football field, all focusing on the approaching fleet. Sarah stood at the center of the Perseverance's bridge, watching the tactical display with calculated calm. Around her, her crew worked with the focused intensity of those who knew they were about to make history. One way or another, the air was thick with tension and the subtle smell of ozone from overworked electronics. Distance to target, 800,000 kilometers and closing. reported Lieutenant Torres. The bioship is... Commander, it's broadcasting something, not a communication, more like a psychic scream. Several crew members winced, pressing hands to their temples. The Void Hunter's first weapon was fear itself, a telepathic assault designed to break the will of their prey before physical combat even began. But humans had evolved on a world where everything tried to kill them. Their ancestors had faced saber-toothed cats with nothing but sharpened sticks and determination. Fear was an old friend, not a master. All ships activate neural shields, Sarah commanded. The neural shields were a crude but effective human invention. Basically, electromagnetic interference generators that scrambled telepathic signals. They gave everyone a splitting headache, but that was better than paralytic terror. Attack pattern alpha. Let's see how they handle. Primitive kinetic weapons. The human fleet spread into a three-dimensional combat formation that would have made any Zentari admiral weep with its lack of elegance. There was no grace to human warfare, no artistic beauty. There was only brutal efficiency. The battlecruisers opened fire with their main railguns, accelerating tungsten rods to 20% of light speed. In space, there was no sound, but Sarah could feel the vibration through the deck plating as the Perseverance's main guns fired. The tungsten rods crossed the distance in seconds, slamming into the bioship with forces measured in gigatons. Where they hit, massive wounds opened in the creature's flesh, spurting a dark ichor that crystallized instantly in the vacuum. The bioship reeled, its tentacles flailing in what might have been pain or rage. But then something remarkable happened. The wounds began to close. The bioship's flesh flowed like liquid, sealing the damage in minutes. It had adapted, its skin hardening into something that could better resist kinetic impacts. The next volley of railgun fire did significantly less damage. They learned fast, Dr. Okonkwo observed, his fingers dancing across his console. But they're still biological. Switch to incendiary rounds, white phosphorus payloads. Sarah nodded. All ships load incendiary ammunition. Target the eyes. The second assault was different. The tungsten rods now carried payloads that burst on impact, spreading chemical fire that burned even in the vacuum of space, feeding on the bioship's own organic matter. The creature's eyes burst like massive blisters, and this time, its scream was transmitted on radio frequencies, a sound that made crew members rip off their headsets. More Void Hunter ships were approaching now, 5 of them, each as large as the first. They moved in perfect coordination, like fingers of the same hand, smaller organisms detached from their surfaces, fighter-sized creatures that looked like flying tumors with teeth. They swarmed toward the human fleet in the thousands. Launch all fighters, Sarah ordered. Weapons free. Human fighter craft were considered a joke by most spacefaring species. While others had developed AI-controlled drones or remote-piloted vehicles, humans still strapped themselves into small metal coffins and flew them manually. It was insane by any reasonable standard. It was also devastatingly effective. The fighter pilots, all volunteers who had undergone years of training to withstand G-forces that would kill most aliens, engaged the biofighters with a fury that shocked even Sarah. They flew through the swarm, plasma cannons blazing, micro-missiles finding targets with unerring accuracy. When ammunition ran low, some pilots used their ships as rams, the reinforced titanium hulls of human fighters punching through biological matter like bullets through paper. But the Void Hunters were learning, adapting. The biofighters began secreting an acid that could eat through human hull plating. The larger ships started generating some kind of electromagnetic field that deflected railgun rounds. For every human tactic, they developed a counter within minutes. Sarah realized they were fighting the battle wrong. They were trying to beat the Void Hunters at their own game, adaptation and evolution. But humans had never won through biological superiority. They had won through tool use, through creativity, through sheer bloody-minded refusal to give up. Dr. Okonkwo, she said, an idea forming. Those bioships, they're alive, right? Truly biological organisms? As far as we can tell, yes. Why? What happens to biological organisms when they're exposed to radiation? The scientist's eyes widened with understanding. Commander, you're not suggesting... I am. All ships prepare for Nuclear Protocol 7. There was a moment of silence across the fleet. Nuclear Protocol 7 had never been used in actual combat. It was considered too dangerous, too unpredictable. It involved detonating nuclear warheads not as weapons but as massive EMP and radiation sources. The electromagnetic pulse would fry electronics for millions of kilometers, and the radiation would poison anything biological in the area. It would render the space around Krylos Prime uninhabitable for decades. But it would also turn the Void Hunters' greatest strength into their greatest weakness. The warheads launched simultaneously, from every human ship, hundreds of them, spreading out in a carefully calculated pattern. The Void Hunters, perhaps sensing danger, tried to intercept them with biofighters and tentacles. They destroyed many, but humans had built redundancy into everything. For every warhead destroyed, 3 more continued toward their targets. When they detonated, it was like a new constellation being born. The flashes were visible from Krillus Prime's surface, where surviving Krillians looked up in wonder and terror. The electromagnetic pulse washed over the bioships, and for the first time, the Void Hunters screamed in genuine agony. Their biological nature made them vulnerable to radiation in ways that shielded human ships were not. Their flesh began to bubble and mutate uncontrollably, their careful adaptations turning into cancer-like growths that consumed them from within. But Sarah wasn't done. Phase 2. Deploy the bacteria bombs. This was humanity's dirtiest secret, the weapon that even Earth's military had debated using. Canisters filled with extremophile bacteria, organisms from Earth's most hostile environments, genetically modified to consume organic matter at an accelerated rate. On Earth, they were contained by careful protocols and environmental limits. In space, exposed to radiation that would cause rapid mutation, they would become something uncontrollable. The canisters burst against the wounded bioships, and the bacteria went to work. They consumed the Void Hunters' flesh, spreading like wildfire through their biological systems. The bioships tried to adapt, but the bacteria were mutating faster than they could evolve defenses. It was evolution at fast forward, millions of years of adaptation happening in minutes. The largest bioship, the one that seemed to coordinate the others, made a decision that shocked everyone. It began to retreat, calling its smaller companions back. The Void Hunters, who had never met effective resistance in their long history of conquest, were running from primitive Deathworlders with nuclear weapons and bacterial infections. Sarah opened a channel to the retreating bioships, broadcasting on all frequencies. "This is Commander Sarah Chen of the United Earth Defense Force. You came here looking for easy prey. You found something else. We are humans. We evolved on a world that tried to kill us every day, and we survived. We split the atom before we cured the common cold. We nearly destroyed ourselves a dozen times and came back stronger. And we have one trait you don't understand. We protect those who cannot protect themselves. Leave this system, leave Krillian space, and spread the word to whatever dark corner of the universe you came from. This sector is under human protection now." The bioships continued their retreat, moving faster than anyone had seen them travel before. Within hours, they had left Krillian space entirely, leaving behind only the slowly dissolving remains of their dead. The immediate threat was over, but the work was just beginning. Human ships deployed to Krillus Prime's surface, bringing medical supplies, food, and most importantly, hope. The Krillians who emerged from their shelters were unlike anything humans had encountered before. They were tall crystalline beings who communicated through harmonic resonance. They were beautiful in an alien way, their bodies refracting light into rainbow patterns. Resonance of Stars, the Krillian who had sent the last desperate message, approached Sarah when she landed on the planet's surface. The translator struggled with the complex harmonics of Krillian language, but the emotion came through clearly. "We had given up hope," Resonance of Stars sang, the notes carrying profound gratitude. "The galaxy abandoned us. But you came, why? You gained nothing from this. You risked everything." Sarah looked at the devastated city around them, at the human medics treating injured Krillians, at the engineers already working to restore power systems. "We came because you asked for help. That's what humans do. We're stubborn like that." The Galactic Commerce Alliance's response to humanity's victory was immediate and dramatic. The Zentari ambassador himself came to Earth, something that had never happened before. The four-armed alien stood before the World Council, his usual arrogance replaced with something that might have been respect. "You used nuclear weapons in biological warfare," he said, his tone carefully neutral. "You violated 12 different conventions of civilized warfare. You rendered an entire sector radioactive. You deployed bacteria that could potentially consume entire worlds." Sarah, standing as Earth's representative, met his four eyes without flinching. "Yes, we did. And we'd do it again." "The galaxy has always wondered about humans," the Zentari continued. You're physically weaker than most species. Your technology is primitive. Your lifespan is brief, but now we understand. You're not successful despite coming from a death world. You're successful because of it. You've faced extinction so many times that you've become experts at preventing it, for yourselves and now it seems for others. The aftermath changed everything. The Krillians, grateful beyond measure, shared their scientific knowledge with humanity. Their understanding of mathematics and physics jumped human technology forward by centuries. Other species, seeing that humans would actually fight for those who couldn't fight for themselves, began reaching out. Trade agreements were signed. Alliances were formed. But perhaps the most significant change came 6 months later. Another distress signal reached Earth, this time from a species called the Thylorians, peaceful herbivores under attack by pirates. The Galactic Commerce Alliance, for the first time in its 1,000-year history, formally requested human military assistance. Sarah stood once again in the command center, reading the request. Lieutenant Torres stood beside her, a knowing smile on his face. They're asking for our help. The same ones who called us primitive barbarians. Funny how perspectives change, Sarah replied. She turned to address her staff. Prepare the fleet. It seems we have a reputation to maintain. As the human fleet prepared for another rescue mission, word spread throughout the galaxy. The Deathworlders had become something nobody expected. Protectors. They were still dangerous, still capable of violence that made other species uncomfortable, but now that violence had purpose and direction, the Void Hunters were never seen again in that sector of space. Some said they had retreated to whatever dark dimension they came from. Others claimed they still lurked at the edges of known space, but now they checked star charts carefully, avoiding any system under human protection. And in schools throughout Krillian space, young crystalline beings learned a new song, a harmonic composition about the day the stars burned bright with nuclear fire, and strangers from a distant world proved that sometimes the most dangerous species could also be the most heroic. They called it the Deathworld Symphony, and it became their most treasured cultural artifact, a reminder that in the darkest moment, when all seemed lost, help came from the last place anyone expected. Humanity had found its place in the galaxy not through superior technology or ancient wisdom, but through the simple act of giving a damn when nobody else would. It was, as Sarah often said, a very human thing to do.